This is an incredibly influential film.
Absolutely. Every little moment works perfectly. It only gets better each time you see it.
Hidey-ho!
It is the definition of filmmaking at its best.
And it just lights up the screen. It kind of blows all the competition away. It's essential.
What do you want? Where's Sergeant Valentine? Here! Where's Sergeant Cutter? He's busy.
So, Brad, it's been more than 80 years since Gunga Din was released. Do you recall when you first saw it?
I saw it as a kid, and I just remember being taken away by the humor in it and the sort of sense of joy there was to it, even though it was an adventure. It seemed to be kind of goofy, and that kind of sparked my interest.
Yeah, there's real jeopardy in this movie, but it always seems as if Cary Grant and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Victor McLaglen are having fun.
They are having fun, and they have a chemistry that feels like they're familiar with each other. And I think that that particular group had a sort of chemistry that really hasn't been repeated.
Oh, your petticoat's showing.
So the romantic lead is Douglas Fairbanks Jr., but that part...
Grant, originally, right?
Right, yeah, and somewhat of a surprise, instinctively, that Grant would switch and take the Cutter role.
But I think it was because his career was starting to light up. He had a 5-year span there, and this was about a year and a half, 2 years into that 5-year span where practically every movie he made was kind of a classic. And I think he was feeling liberated. And the fact that he is like classically handsome and romantic, but has this amazing comic ability, he was just starting to feel his oats on that.
Yeah, so he'd done Topper, The Awful Truth.
Bringing Up Baby.
Right, Bringing Up Baby, Holiday. Bringing Up Baby actually relates in significant ways to Gunga Din because Howard Hawks was the initial director.
Right, yeah. It's the fact that Bringing Up Baby bombed that made him be replaced. I actually think he would have been a great director for Gunga Din, but it went to George Stevens, and George Stevens also had an ability with comedy that I think was impressive. In some ways, the film has not aged as well as some of the others we're going to be talking about. It has some weird filmmaking in it at moments, just too close of a close-up suddenly, and some strange things. But it also has a scale to it and a joy to it that I think is very infectious.
Stevens, you mentioned some of the peculiar filmmaking techniques, but all these great filmmakers, right, of course, the artists grow into what they become.
Yeah, but I think one of the things that's cool about it is you can see its DNA show up in a lot of action films that are more recent. The most obvious one is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which has the rope bridge gag, it has the thuggy, or tuggy, I guess they say in the movie. And the movie has this freewheeling feeling that I think is wonderful, and it gets bigger as the movie goes on and has some huge set pieces at the end of the movie that are really fun to watch.
Originally, this is a Rudyard Kipling story.
It's a poem, and I think that the brilliant screenwriters Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur combined the poem with Soldiers 3, which was a Kipling story, and kind of made something exclusive to the movie.
So one of the issues that I have with the movie, that when you watch it now, and again, it's been 81 years, this is one of the classics from Hollywood's greatest years. It's often referred to, I'm not sure it's true, but it's certainly one of its greatest years, 1939. Yes. Is that these movies that dealt with British colonialism left no ambiguity about British colonialism.
Oh,
the British were good, and those fighting for freedom were terrorists, essentially.
Right. That's evolved.
That has evolved. But if we're going to appreciate these movies, you accept that.
Yeah.
And you can talk about it, but you have to account for that and then in some ways let it go if you're
But
gonna
that's
enjoy the
also
film.
true of if you're reading Kipling or anything like that, that comes up too. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't read Kipling. It just means that, you know, the world moves on. And I think that you can filter out all the good stuff and enjoy it for what it is.
All right, Brad, thanks very much. We'll watch the film. We'll talk more afterwards.
Let's do it.
Here it is from 1939, directed by George Stevens, Gunga Din. This is filmmaking at its best.
It's essential.
Though lives are at stake in this movie, you sort of always sense throughout that this is going to end joyfully.
Yeah, I think what's surprising about it is the Gunga Din character is a minor character for the first half of the movie.
Yes.
And he gradually gets feathered in, and you think it's just a side character, and it ends up being a key player in the conclusion of the film, which I think is cool.
We talked a little bit about George Stevens before the film. Stevens really grew as a filmmaker. I suppose we should not find that in any way surprising. People grow into their art, right?
But it's also, I think that he had a big growth period from his experiences in World War II. He kind of went off, and of all the filmmakers that went into the war, he came back the most changed.
Yeah, the George Stevens before the war is like a different director than the George Stevens after the war. They're both good, they're just not quite the same personal.
Well, I think he deepened, and you know, he was kind of the swing time guy and the guy that could make...
The more the merrier was his last movie before going over.
There you go.
After the war, Stevens, and there were signs of this before, but he was a very deliberate filmmaker, famously took better than a year just to edit Giant. You don't rush into a project either.
No, but I've been behind the 8 ball on several of them, probably half of the movies that I've made where we go in and suddenly, you know, like the last movie I made, Incredibles 2, they took a year off the schedule, and we just had to adjust. And I thought we could do it, so I agreed to it. But, you know, it was tough. And so I've had tight situations. Iron Giant was short for an animated film. We had a tight budget. You know, I can deal with it, but it's not something I choose to do.
Were movies like this in your mind when you make Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol?
In a way, yeah. I mean, the tone that I mentioned to everyone was I wanted it to have more comedy in it. And one of the films that I did mention was Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the first Indiana Jones film. The second Indiana Jones film, I think, has the DNA of Gunga Din in it. But I think all of the Indiana Jones films have a lightness and a comedic nature to action that doesn't undercut the menace.
Hard to imagine any director who's trying to put something, a degree of fun, as you say, without undercutting the menace into a modern action film. Like, number one on that list is always going to be Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah, and I think that the tone is elusive, and you know, I think in its own weird way, Die Hard has some of that energy in it. It's a funny movie, but never to the point where you don't feel the menace. It feels like real menace, just like Raiders feels like real menace. People die in it, and but it still is. It enjoys the fact that it's an adventure, and it has fun with it.
All right, Brad, thanks very much, and we'll be back next week.
I can't wait.
Here's a little preview of what you'll be seeing next time on The Essentials. Powell and Pressburger's A Matter of Life and Death from 1947.
This film is shot by Jack Cardiff, who was one of the greatest cinematographers that ever lived.
David Niven had been a star before the war. From 39 to 45, Niven was in the Army. This is his first movie back.
Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger have a body of work that is one of the greatest in all of film.
It's heaven, isn't it?
That's next Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern. Thanks for joining us for The Essentials.